Thank you for joining the How to Communicate About Climate Change training, brought to you by the City of Grand Rapids Office of Sustainability. My name is Annabelle Wilkinson, and I work as the city's Environmental and Climate Justice Specialist, and I'll be guiding you through this training today, the second of a series on climate change. To begin, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. I would like to acknowledge that we are here on the beautiful ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe people, the people of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi. We recognize the sovereignty of Michigan's Indigenous nations and historic communities, both those who live here now and those who were forcibly removed from their homelands. We want to express gratitude and appreciation to the Indigenous peoples across this continent who have been living and caring for this land from time immemorial, who are still here and will always continue to be present in this place. For this second training, I'll be going over some research on how folks in the US think about global warming, some tips on how to have a conversation about climate change, and help you create your own climate story. We have a couple worksheets available for this training. If you'd like to use them, please look for a link to the documents in the description below, or I would recommend at least having a piece of paper as well as something to write with available to you. Let's get communicating. First, we're going to take a look at some data on how people communicate about climate change in the US and what their thoughts are. You all have noticed that climate change has become a bit of a politicized and potentially divisive issue. My brother came to visit me last year, and as we were sitting down to lunch, I mentioned something related to work, which of course for me is around climate change. And I got the response, "Annabelle, I don't want to talk politics." But climate change, as recent as the 90s, was considered a bipartisan issue. And you'll be happy to know that according to the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication, most people are at least open to having a conversation. 91% of people, in fact. The Yale Program on Climate Change Communication also determined that there are 6 types of Americans on the topic of global warming. The alarmed are convinced global warming is happening, human-caused, an urgent threat, and supports climate policies, but most don't know what they or others can do to solve the problem. The concerned think human-caused global warming is happening, is a serious threat, and support climate policies. However, they tend to believe that climate impacts are still distant in time and space, making climate change a lower priority. The cautious have not yet made up their minds. Is global warming happening? Is it human-caused? Is it serious? They're not sure. The disengaged know little about global warming, rarely or never hearing about it in their media. The doubtful do not think global warming is happening, or they believe it is just a natural cycle. They don't think much about the issue or consider it a serious risk. The dismissive believes global warming is not happening, not human-caused, and not a threat, and most endorse conspiracy theories, like global warming is a hoax. With the 9% who are categorized as dismissive, in all likelihood, there's nothing you can say that would alter their views. But for the other 91%, and like my brother, the disengaged, I'll take you through some steps on how to start a conversation. But first, I want to show you quickly some studies on how people across the country, and in Kent County specifically, respond to climate change issues. Studies show, despite polarization, most people, 72%, agree that it is happening. Where we can begin to see a disconnect is that the majority of people do not think global warming will harm them personally. However, we see some hope because across the board, what people do agree on and respond to is creating solutions. However, despite our best intentions, we just don't talk about climate change. Only 35% of adults said they discuss global warming at least occasionally. So, let's figure out the best way to start talking. Essentially, the best messenger is you, to people you know, people you trust, and people who hold the same values. You can start with using your voice to talk about why this matters to you, and share your climate story we'll work to create today. But also, why this matters to our community. So here is where you'll start, with either your worksheet or your piece of paper. I would like you to take an inventory about you. Take a moment to write down the answer to this question. How do you connect with other people? If you are religious, you could talk to people who share your faith. If you're a parent, you can talk with other parents about your children's future. If you like to drink beer or wine, you could talk with folks on preparing for climate change's impact on the growing seasons of hops, barley, and grapes. Take a minute to write down 3 characteristics about yourself that you could connect with others about, and that's where you start. If you've identified how you connect with others, here are the next steps in having a conversation. Begin by bonding over what you have in common, or if you don't know them, ask questions, get to know them, and figure out what they care about. What are their values? Do you share an activity you both enjoy? It's all about relationships. Next, connect. Connect the dots between what they care about and climate change. How does this affect what we both already care about? Last, inspire. How can we work together to tackle this problem in a way that is compatible with our values? Discuss and share positive solutions to empower people and produce actionable results. And remember, the goal is not to tell people about climate change. The goal is to open the door and expand the number of people in the conversation. Ask questions and listen to understand. Practice talking about what you care about and listen to what someone else cares about too. You can plant a seed, you can fertilize and water it, but you can't will it to grow. Plus, sometimes growth takes time. As for my brother, I took some time to plan how to go about our next conversation, not from an anecdote from my work life, but by reaching out to him and his values, which are innovation and fiscal sustainability. As he was working as an intern with Ford, I connected with him on the new wave of electric vehicles hitting the market. He was excited about it and he wanted one. He's still a work in progress, but I know as he enters the workforce, I'll have plenty of opportunities to talk to him about energy efficiency measures and ask what he thinks of a free market approach to climate change. Another great way to bond and connect with folks is to share your climate story. Your climate story is sharing your personal experience and connection with climate change. One of the reasons creating a climate change story is so important is because it highlights the knowledge of lived experience, making it easier for others to understand and relate. Also, as the effects of climate change disproportionately fall on communities of color, who often do not have the resources to prepare for and recover from them, climate stories, and especially the lived experiences of people of color, need to be heard, uplifted, and centered. So, we're going to walk you through some prompts to create your own, but first, as an example, I'd like to share my climate story. A number of years ago, before I made Grand Rapids my home, I was living out in Portland, Oregon. I considered myself so lucky to live in a place where I felt comfortable walking and biking to work and was always filled with gratitude when crossing the bridge home each day when I could see Mount Hood often glimmering in the distance. Despite what people tell you, Oregon is not all rain, and when I moved there it was 90 to 100 degrees every day, sunny and dry heat for months. It was, and I'm sure still is, a great place to go hiking, connect with nature, and overall enjoy the outdoors. But as the next summer came, so did wildfires. I woke up one day, walked outside, and found that it was raining ash from the sky. I looked up and noticed that it wasn't cloudy. The cover above was just an endless view of smoke. Honestly, it looked post-apocalyptic, like the end of the world, and this was something we were just supposed to accept as our new normal. As someone who has asthma, the air quality quickly affected me. I started coughing and felt unable to take deep breaths and quickly went back inside. I didn't have access to a car at the time, so I spent the next month choosing to risk my health to walk to work, wearing a makeshift mask to keep out the fumes and particles. I ended up staying inside more, which wasn't great for my mental health, which I'm sure we've all experienced by now. And ultimately, this experience made me afraid for our future on this earth. It was a wake-up call that all the natural beauty I valued so highly, along with my ability to be with my community, was directly linked with our ability to address climate change. And that is what has led me here to this work, and to you all today, in the hopes that we can begin a conversation in our hearts on how we each can contribute to what can sometimes feel like an overwhelming topic. Now, before we begin our prompts, just remember there's no right way to tell your climate story. But here are some things to keep in mind as we begin. First of all, make it personal, descriptive, and emotional. Use statements like, I feel or I see. Describe things in detail. What did it look like, feel like, taste like? And lastly, how did it make you feel? We'll be giving you 5 minutes to journal for each of the 3 prompts, and then an additional 5 minutes to weave the writings from these prompts together into a story. Do your best to write as much as you can on each prompt. I don't expect for you to finish your climate story in this time. You may need to come back to it later, but I hope you're able to come away from this exercise with unlocking how climate change shows up in your life. For our first prompt, we'd like you to tell a story about an experience that has helped shape the person you are today. How has that influenced the way you see the world? Note, this is not necessarily climate change related. This reflection should be personal. After you've written that down, look at where you might find the connections to climate change within your story. We'll provide a few minutes for you to write your response. second prompt, we'd like you to examine: what is your experience of climate change? How have you been impacted? What observations have you noticed? Or, how have you been thinking about climate change lately? What have you heard recently? What parts speak to you? Now, one way to work through this is to think, how are you connected to a meaningful feature of your home place? This meaningful feature or object of care could be your family and friends, a favorite natural area, clean water, or an element of your local community. What are your observations of the changing climate around you, and how do these changes threaten your object of care? For example, how does climate change impact your family, finances, or your favorite local park? Take a few minutes to write down your response. third and final prompt, we know that to create a better future, we must first imagine ourselves there. So we would like you to imagine, what would a better world look like to you? What is the role that you will play in making it a reality? Why are you motivated to confront the climate crisis? What is your vision you have for yourself, your community, and society moving forward? Take a few minutes to write your response. Now that you've completed the 3 prompts, we're going to weave your story together. Look over your writings as a whole. Take notice of any big picture themes and possible connecting points. Remember, this is a process, and it may not be complete right away. And as you're looking over your writings, ask what values can you find within your stories. Some examples could be beauty, compassion, or family. Take a few minutes to weave your story together. Now that you've taken the time to create your climate story, the next step is to share it. Your voice is important and what you have to say matters. In climate change, we are all eyewitnesses, and we all have a story to tell. So, take that first step and tell a friend, neighbor, coworker, or family member. Submit it to your local newspaper, online publication, or our Office of Sustainability newsletter. Set up a meeting with your legislature to share your story and attach it to a specific ask to address climate change. And if you would like your climate story to be included in the city's Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, please reach out to me by the phone number or email address on the slide. And now that you've created that connection point, stay tuned for our next training in the series, where we will help you to inspire by discussing some positive climate solutions.